Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, someone can tell me if you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, hi everyone, my name is Shahrabani. I am the chair of this session. Welcome to this session. Our session is about measurement of preferences. We have here 4 presenters. Each one has a time slot of 18 minutes for presentation and also have 10 minutes for discussion and questions, of course. So we will start with Ewa from University of Warsaw. So Ewa, are you ready to start?
Yes, I am ready. Hello.
Okay, you can share the screen. I hope. Okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you. Okay.
Before you start, Ewa, I just want to mention that if someone wants to ask questions, please, you can write in the chat, using the chat. And at the end of this presentation, after 18 minutes, if you want to ask, you can do it by chat or by voice, whatever you like. Okay, Ewa will take it.
All right, yes, and also during the presentation, I also have my open window with chats, so you can text there any clarifying questions, and I will try to answer immediately during my talk.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I would like to talk about consequentiality in dichotomous choice contingent valuation, and I will focus on experimental design effects. So that's a joint work with 3 other researchers, 2 from Norway and 1 from UK. Okay, so about contingent valuation and how it's done with stated preference methods. So they provide estimates of economic value of non-market goods. So for example, what is the value of clean air? What is the value of a national park, etc. So they help determine what is the value of such goods to the society. That's useful, for example, for a cost-benefit analysis to provide an estimate of benefits. And they have really wide range of applications in transportation, health, environment, culture, many others. So these value estimates are derived from preferences which are stated in surveys. So typically, those are very large survey studies on representative samples of respondents. And here I placed an example of the dichotomous choice question. So, for example, would you be willing to pay €5 annually to reduce marine plastic litter around Svalbard as specified in the proposed policy in the survey before? And this dichotomous choice because the answer is yes or no to this particular question. So those have many advantages. They capture use and passive use values and then can go beyond the scope of the existing data on observed behavior. But this actually also consists a disadvantage because they are not based on market behavior. Also, they may be viewed as not really related to direct consequences. So these incentive properties in different types of questions are not sufficiently understood yet. So in an answer to that, the conditions for truthful preference revelation were proposed. And one of these conditions requires that a survey, so the stated preference survey, needs to be consequential. So what does it mean that a survey needs to be consequential? There's a couple of definitions in the literature. I placed here 2 most well-known. So one is simply that a respondent needs to feel a potential influence on agency actions when voting, when answering in a survey. Maybe more detailed definition is in the contemporary guidance for stated preference studies. So it is that an individual faces or perceives a non-zero probability that their responses will influence the decisions related to the outcome in question, and that they will be required to pay for that outcome. So you see two pieces over here, which we refer in the literature as policy consequentiality and payment consequentiality. So in a sense here, a respondent have a feeling that understands that when answering the survey, they can really affect the policy. So for example, whether a proposed policy, proposed program will be introduced, and payment. So here is the belief whether I will indeed be required to pay for implementing this change. For example, for the policy of having fewer leaders around Svalbard, as in the example on the first slide. But there are some challenges with measuring this consequentiality, with controlling for it. So one approach to control for consequentiality is simply to communicate it. And it's often done via survey scripts, but it does not necessarily work well. So there are studies showing that actually it does not work well. So maybe we should elicit consequentiality perceptions. Instead of communicate that to people, maybe we should ask them about their perceptions of consequentiality. A typical general question is, to what extent do you believe that the survey outcome will affect the decision of public authorities? And the questions may also differ whether they emphasize policy or payment. So here the example is of a general question, but we may also differentiate between the two. Another challenge is how to include the data on consequentiality perceptions in preference modeling. So the problem is with endogeneity. So the self-reports, which people say about perceived consequentiality, may be driven by similar factors which are unobservable as stated preferences. So those could lead to endogeneity in modeling. So about eliciting consequentiality, there are many studies which apply this single question, but very few actually distinguish between the different aspects. And given that these challenges, and this is very limited guidance in this area, we try to address these issues in our study. So another more literature view on this endogeneity problem. So that's really limited and mixed evidence on endogeneity. So studies that suggest endogeneity here are listed. So for example, Grutius et al. Suggest that unobserved factors strengthen consequentiality and also decrease the likelihood of voting for a particular program in the survey. Also, they observed that higher tax amounts in the preference elicitation questions, so the one which I showed you at the beginning, for example, reduce both consequentiality and willingness to pay for the program. Loyola Smith et al. Observes that when they do not control for endogeneity in the model, the perceived consequentiality affects stated preferences, affects willingness to pay values. But this effect disappears when they control for endogeneity, so it emphasizes the need for the endogeneity control. But there are studies which show there is no specific problem of endogeneity, though they all control for endogeneity with the use of instrumental variables using social demographics. What's important, none of these studies try to address policy and payment consequentiality separately. So given these two aspects, limited evidence, and also that none of them really try to address separately the two aspects, we try to do that in this research. So we ask the two questions. Are self-reports on policy and payment consequentiality endogenous to stated preference? Do the self-reports depend on the preference question attributes? Here, we focus on the project cost. So the cost which is displayed in the single binary question, dichotomous choice question, whether you would like to pay a specific amount for this project. The data which we use is a contingent valuation survey. So that was an initiative to reduce the impact of marine plastic litter around Svalbard in Norway. So here you see the description on the right-hand side of the program. We have the current situation and also the initiative. And that was described the impact of beaches on mammals, birds, and microplastics. So how this marine plastic litter could be reduced. The survey was conducted among Norwegian households, and it was online in June 2018. We collected 552 usable questionnaires just to show the Svalbard is in this place in Europe and the north of Norway. And the major question regarding this elicitation of the preferences was, considering the anticipated results of the initiative outlined above, would you vote for this initiative if it would cost your household an annual tax of, here the amount was displayed, and these were the different amounts. And the question was simply yes or no. So this dichotomous shows different amounts in Norwegian kroner. We had two Likert scale statements for consequentiality measures. They were assessed on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And the policy consequentiality measures, so that my responses to the survey will have an influence on whether this initiative is implemented. And the payment consequentiality, if the government carries out this initiative, I believe that I will be charged with the tax of, and here, the amount which was displayed also in the question. So a person, just so like this, just single question, so single amount. These amounts were randomly assigned to individuals. And also here, the same amount was displayed. We checked the rank order correlation of the two statements. And here is the distribution. For modeling purposes, we needed also to recode it into binary variables. So for that, we made a threshold here. So we made a cutoff point here. So that means that payment consequentiality, it's payment consequential when it's one of those levels, and it's not when that was strong disagreement or disagreement. Same for policy consequentiality. Strong disagreement or disagreement, it's not, but it's policy consequential when there is sort of agreement or neither or nor. So this binary recording, it's according to the knife edge results, so-called knife edge in the stated preference literature. So that means that a marginally positive probability of consequences is enough, of perceived consequences is enough. And that's what we do here. So when someone disagrees, well, of course, it's no policy consequentiality, but at least when there's maybe neither nor, we are kind of not sure whether a person sees some consequence or not. So we code it as one.
5 minutes left. Sorry.
What methodology we use? We use binary ordered probit models for drivers of consequentiality, which we do not show here, but also tree-variate probit model. The tree-variate probit model shows us the drivers of consequentiality, the impact of consequentiality on stated preferences, but also helps us control for endogeneity of consequentiality and the correlation between payment and policy consequentiality. I will skip the slide on the methodology on the tree-variate probit model. What is, of course, essential in there is the choice of the instrumental variables. Because the consequentiality equations need to be instrumented by some statements. And here are the statements which we use as my decisions and behavior can help reduce marine plastic litter. And another one is my personal actions do not play a significant role in the health of the marine environment. So we believe that they correlate with perceived consequentiality, so can be used as instruments of consequentiality because both variables capture some general sense of respondents' perceived ability to influence the environmental problem, but we do not see any direct effect on the yes or no vote of the statements because they are not directly related to governmental initiatives, and also they are very general. They do not refer to a type of behavior or decisions which would be linked to governmental initiative. These are explanatory variables which we use pretty standard, and here are the results of our tree-variate probit model. So we have these three equations, the voting equation and the payment and the policy equation. So we focus first on the consequentiality equations. here we have the decisions and actions variables. So the instrumental variables, the two coded instrumental variables. And we can observe that one is correlated in particular with payment consequentiality. The other one explains policy consequentiality. Here, we observe that the tax amount influences payment and policy consequentiality, but in opposite directions. And in the yes-no vote, what we observe, well, the payment and policy both increase the probability of voting for the initiative. The correlation between vote and consequentialities appears to be negative, which implies that there are some factors which lower the likelihood of voting yes for the program, and also increase the chance of viewing the survey as consequential. So we can say that the consequentiality is endogenous in the voting equation. This helps us control for the potential correlation, which is significant, between payment and policy consequentialities. So we observe these divergent effects of a tax. So the one which I reported over here on payment and policy consequentiality. For higher tax amount, we have stronger policy consequentiality, so viewed as more likely that responses will affect the decision, and weaker payment consequentiality. So people view it as less likely that the tax will be imposed. Interesting extension of past work. So Brutus et al. Found that higher tax amount weakened perceived consequentiality, but did the respondents interpret the consequentiality maybe more like payment because they didn't distinguish between payment and policy consequentiality? Loyola et al. So they found no effect of a tax on consequentiality. So here, maybe the opposite effects balance out. So that we find it's maybe some extension to this past works. How we can also explain this positive effect, which is kind of in contrast. Well, maybe this tax amount is seen as a lever to affect the implementation. So the higher tax, the more weight of the referendum outcome. Also, strong public focus on marine plastic pollution in Norway could be an explanation. The society may know that the initiative is costly. So if they ask to contribute very little, maybe they do not find it as credible that it will be effectively implemented. So we believe that this contributes to the understanding of consequentiality aspects. And in particular, we contribute to this earlier evidence. Consequentiality perceptions may be a function of experimental design features. Cost, in our case, weakens payment consequentiality and strengthens policy consequentiality. And this is robust if we include or exclude the instrumental variables. We also find some evidence of endogeneity of consequentiality perceptions. But of course, this finding needs to be treated with caution because it depends on the validity of our instruments. We also know there's possibility of the context dependence of our results, as also mentioned that maybe it's something particular for Norway, where people were more familiar with the general context situation. Thank you for the attention, and I'm happy to answer questions or hear some comments.
Any questions?
All right, if there are none, I guess like we can move forward to the next one.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva, for your presentation. The next one is Yefim from Haifa University. Yefim?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, let's see you.
Yeah, 1 second, you will see me in a second.
Okay.
1 second, I have a problem with the connection. One
Okay.
second, please.
We will wait.
Yeah. Now you see me? Oops.
Not yet.
Now you will see me. I hope so. Oops.
We see your presentation.
You see my
Okay,
presentation?
now
I
we
hope
see
you
you.
see me as well.
Okay, good luck to you.
Thank you. Okay. So do you see the presentation as well?
We see it, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So hi all, my name is Yefim, and I will speak about the decision to check in multi-alternative choices and the limited sensitivity to default. So let's assume that you face one of the following decisions. For example, which of the multiple roads to choose to drive home, or which hotel to book, not that relevant nowadays, but let's hope it will become relevant again soon, or which appliance, for example, specific TV to buy. So in each of these decisions, you can use your past experience, whatever you used previously, or you can use a decision aid. For example, smartphone application to guide your choices. And the question is, will you use these applications? So there is a huge previous literature on search for information or search for products. And most of this literature assumes that the search is difficult. But what happens nowadays when the search is simple, often a matter of a few clicks on the smartphone. So will the participants use the search aids nowadays when it's very simple to use them? So to answer this question, we use a variant of what's known as the clicking paradigm, a lab clicking paradigm, which I will explain in a moment what is it exactly. I want to just reiterate what is the motivation of the study. So let's assume an example that you have to drive home, and now you can either use the usual roads that you use, or you can use your navigation device, for example, Waze, to use it and to choose what is the fastest road. So we are interested in questions like that. Will you use your navigation device, the Waze, to show you the fastest way home, or will you just drive with the road that you usually use? Now, notice that the use of Waze is it costs you only a few seconds and maybe the battery of your smartphone. So there is a cost, but it is very low cost compared to previous literature of search for information. So the question is, will you use it in repeated decisions, like a decision which road to take home? So as I said, we are using a clicking paradigm, a variant of the clicking paradigm. And what is known to participants in this clicking paradigm? Basically nothing. Okay, so what is unknown? Basically everything else. Now seriously, the participants know in this paradigm that it's a repeated search task. They know that their payoff will be one randomly selected trial and their show-up fee. And they know that the check alternative provides the best outcome of all the alternatives minus a fixed cost of the checking. That's all. And I will show you in a moment how exactly it looks. Here is how it looks. So unknownly to the participants, there are 100 trials, 100 repeated choices. Each of the alternatives, which represents different choices, different alternatives, has a uniform distribution between 0 and 10. So the expected value of each of the alternatives is 5. And the check alternative, it provides the maximal value of all the alternatives minus the checking cost, which is 3 in this case. So the expected value of checking is higher than each of these alternatives. It's 5.6. In other words, checking is beneficial, it's worthwhile. But notice that it's never the best alternative because always one of the alternatives provide higher than checking payoff. Okay, So in the first stage, the participants have to choose one of the buttons. They click on it, and then they see their payoff and the foregone payoffs. The other payoffs will they have chosen other alternatives, and then they have to click on the next button to proceed to the next trial and move on. And this is the way the experiment proceeded for 100 repeated trials. So again, it's the next trial. Again, the participants just have to click on one of the buttons. They click on it, they see all the payoffs, and so on for 100 trials. By the way, why the checking alternative provides in this trial 3 points? Because the maximal value of these 5 alternatives is 6. The cost of checking unknown to the participants but fixed is 3. So the value of checking is the maximal value in this trial, which is 6 minus 3, it is 3. So notice that although the participants don't know the cost of checking, because the environment is fixed and they have a lot of experience, as I said, 100 trials, they can fastly learn it. Okay, and I repeat, the checking is worthwhile. It provides higher expected values than the other alternatives, but it is never the best alternative. And we are interested in how often the participants will use this decision aid, which we call checking. What will be the percent of choices that they use it? So, any guess? It's more difficult here to hear any guesses, so I will tell you. Oops, sorry. So the checking rate is about 24%. So it's a relatively low checking rate. Yeah. And the question is, what can be done to increase it? Notice that at the very first trial in this setting, the checking rate was above 80%. So the participants treat checking at the beginning as something good for them. They do like this option, and experience learning brings them to choose the checking option much less, although it's very beneficial to them. Okay, so how can we increase the checking rate? In the next study, we provided participants with presumably high choices. So they observed 25 buttons, 25 alternatives, but in reality, there were only 5 alternatives, and the other alternatives were duplicates of the 5 real alternatives. So again, there are only 5 real alternatives, although the participants observed 25 alternatives. So this study, it shows an environment where the participants seems to have a lot of choice, but actually there is not a big choice. Okay, so what happens here? Again, the expected value of checking is the same as in the previous study, which is 5.6, and each button is 5. So what will be, here is how it looks, by the way. So as you can see, for example, if you click on this button, you see these buttons, you see 10, but if you look, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are exactly 5 clones of the 10, exactly 5 clones of the 8, etc., etc. And checking provides 7 because it's the maximal value, which is 10 minus 3. Okay, so what is the checking rate? And here is how it looks. What is the checking rate in this study? Basically exactly the same as in the previous one. So it's 23%. Okay. Next, we explored what happened when the participants face 25 real alternatives. So in this setting, the expected value of checking is much higher. It's almost 7. Why? Because it's enough that one of the buttons provides 10, so that checking will provide 7, because check is max of all buttons minus 3. So checking in this case, as you can see, is extremely beneficial. But again, it's never the best alternative, because there is always something that is better than checking. So what is the check rate in this setting? So in this setting, the check rate, so as I thought, it's very beneficial. So in this study, the check rate increased to 41%. So as you can see, the checking rate did increase, but not that much. Okay. In the next study, we examined a rather extreme situation where there are 100 alternatives. We wanted to check what will happen in this study. Will this increase the checking rate? So notice that with 100 alternatives, checking is almost always provides 7. So uncertainty avoidance, etc., everything suggests that participants should have a very high checking rate, and it is much better than the other alternatives. Checking provides 7 almost for sure, and all the other buttons provide on the expected value of 5. But again, as in all previous studies, checking is never the best alternative. So what is the checking rate here? And the results, the checking rate here actually decreased a bit. So it's about 37, not about, it's 37%, about the same as in the previous study. So increasing the number of alternatives even to 100 does not increase the checking rate. Okay. In the last study of this series, we thought what will happen if we change the framing of the checking alternative as the default. So a lot of previous literature shows that framing something as the default significantly increases its choice rate. So this was what we checked in this study. So recall that with 5 alternatives and the checking one, the check rate was about 24%. So what will happen? What is the check rate or the default rate here? And the default rate here is 20%. So labeling the checking alternative as the default one has not increased the checking rate. It basically remained the same. It even a little bit decreased. And again, as you can see, initially participants relatively liked the default alternative, but experience leads them to not choose it much. Okay. In a recent study with Ophir Yacobi, a postdoc in Canada, we decided to replicate, to look what happened in this paradigm when we run it not in the lab, but online. So we ran 2 of these experiments, the 5 alternative and the checking, and the 25 alternatives with checking in the mTOR very recently during the COVID time. And as you can see, when we run it online, the participants liked the checking alternative even less than in the lab. So although again the checking alternative is very versatile, the participants in the mTOR choose it even less than in the lab. Okay. So to summarize, it seems that in all these studies, the participants do not use the decision aids, which we refer to as checking, much, even when it's very beneficial and very simple to use. The same results hold when the checking button is labeled as the default one. And we observe even lower checking rates online. I have not talked about it, but we have a simple learning model based on my previous research that captures these results very well. Basically, I will tell in a few words about the learning model. The learning model assumes that the participants rely on small samples. So they basically choose what worked best for them in a small sample of their recalled past experiences. So when we have to make a decision, we recall a few previous instances of our outcomes with different decisions and choose what worked best in this small sample of past experiences. And this model can predict quite well the results of this study. Importantly, this is not a post hoc model. So we first had this model developed in 2016, and it captures well the new studies which were run about a year and two ago. And importantly, it can be summarized that the participants are much more sensitive to the typical outcome rather than to the expected value. So because the typical outcome of checking is lower than of other alternatives, they often choose not to check because other alternatives provide higher value. Okay, so basically this is my story. I want to thank the organizers for this conference. It's not simple to organize a conference online. And thank you for listening, and feel free to contact me at this email or if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Yefim. Questions?
May I have one question, if possible?
Sure.
Yeah, Yefim, thank you very much for an interesting talk. And maybe there are just reflections rather than question itself.
I'm happy for everything.
Yeah, but reflections would be because the results seem to tell that people are really truly boundedly rational in the most general, maybe Herbert Simon sense, maybe someone else, but they are not really looking forward for gaining as much as possible in expected terms, but they have some fast and frugal heuristic, right? And trying to do whatever is most naturally comes to their mind, is most ecologically valid given the circumstances. Would you concur with this interpretation, first of all? And the second following question is, what about alternative models which could explain what is going on? For instance, have you tried to compare your data, for instance, next to directional learning model, which is also simple and probably would predict something similar to what you observe experimentally? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So yeah, they are definitely bounded. You can say that they are rationally bounded in the sense that they don't choose optimally in this sense. But the good news that I think that most of the time people can make good choices provided with the right incentive structure. So given these results, you can change the incentive structures. For example, if you want what we can learn from this, what are the predictions? We can learn that people are very sensitive to the typical outcome, so that if you want participants to check more, you have to make the typical outcome of checking worthwhile. So most of the time they have not to regret their choice, because what happens in this paradigm, most of the time when you choose to check, to use this decision aid, for example, as in a real situation, if you choose to use your Waze, often you regret your decision because the Waze show you to use the road that you will use anyways. So if you want people to use decisions aids, they have to most of the time have positive outcomes out of this, not only in the expected value. And going back to your second question, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm familiar about which learning model have you talked?
I'm talking about the directional learning model as proposed by Reinhard Zelten and his collaborators back in late 1990. Buchta in Zelten is the 1998 in AER is the first paper, I think, which were one of the papers when they developed it. And
I will have to check it. I think Zelten's models might capture these results as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I would have a question concerning an experimental demand effect, maybe, because looking at the experiment, I could imagine that people actually kind of like the thrill of gambling and not checking for that reason. And either way, it's kind of seems boring to press check 100 times. So maybe, so especially like if I look at me, I would probably at least some rounds try to find the best solution instead of pressing the same button 100 times. Can you control for that somehow, or have you an impression on that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, I think I have an answer. So we have other conditions, and for example, even conditions when checking impairs payoff, and still the participants choose it quite often in other conditions. So it depends, it really depends on the condition. I don't think that it is related to boredom. Also notice that whatever you choose, you get the outcome of all the alternatives. And especially with the MTurk participants, they come, many of them treat it as a work and not as something to make, to have fun. So it is very important for them to earn money and to choose the best alternative. It's incentive aligned, all these experiments. So it seems that they really want to choose the best alternative for them. And again, in a slightly different, not the same paradigm, but with different incentive structures, even if checking is not worthwhile, participants, if it provides them the best outcome most of the time, participants choose it often.
Okay,
actually,
thank
in
you.
the 2016 paper, we show one such condition where checking is bad for them, but the participants choose it quite often. So I don't think boredom plays here a role, because it's all, you can say that other alternatives are boring in the same way. Thank you for your question.
Thanks.
And if I may just jump another quick idea, if you have time.
Yeah, sure.
Another very quick idea is that your task, as shown on the screen, seems to be very similar logistically and visually to the bomb risk elicitation task, BRET, right? And there are quite some papers which look at what happens in BRET, and maybe it is worth comparing what you observe in your study with what you observed in BRET. Have you thought about that?
Thank you. No, I have not thought about that, but take into account that in BRET, usually it's kind of one-shot decision, because it is until you are done, right? Until you lose the points. And no, here it is a repeat.
No, sorry, there's a variety of ways you can implement the BRET. One of them is that you can manually or automatically wait until a given a number of boxes is clicked, and then you stop it and you observe the outcome. But you observe the outcome automatically. You cannot avoid observing the outcome. And here you can avoid. So whether the behavior is different or the same, it's not clear. But and then also there, of course, the outcome is binary. It's either you want or not. Here you have a variety, a broader agenda.
Yes,
so it's not the same task, but visually similar.
Yes, I will look at the. I'm familiar with the BRET task. I have not made this connection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you. Again, thanks to the organizers, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Yefim.
Thank you
for your presentation. The next one is Diego from the University of Loyola. Diego?
Hello.
Are you with us? Hello?
Hello.
You can share your screen now.
Okay. My name is Jorrat. I'm doing my PhD at the Loyola University. I wrote this paper with Pablo Brañas, who is my supervisor, with Lorenzo, Victor Orozco from the World Bank, and Erika from the Middlesex University. The idea of this paper is the result of working with the Development Impact Evaluation Unit of the World Bank. Basically, they are interested in measuring the effect of interventions on risk and collect data from very large samples, but they refuse to use real incentives in this task because, according to them, it generates inequality and a sense of unfairness among participants. So remember that in risk experimental tasks, the researcher selects randomly as a lottery to make the payment. So at the end, is selecting to pay a higher amount of money to some subject and a lower amount to others. So it's reasonable to think that it generates inequality. So in this paper, we test whether hypothetical versus monetary payments generate different risk measures. So the motivation is risk preferences is a major behavioral measure, since it's correlated with human capital investment, career decisions, technology adoption, insurance, and many other fields. So exists a growing interest in measuring these preferences, especially in the field. However, experimental tasks as Howlary, Nessian Potters, and others have three important issues when you measure, especially in the field. No? The procedure is long and time-consuming. Paying subject is costly, and solving lotteries at individual level generate inequality. And so a moral concern emerges, especially when you try to measure risk in field experiment with large sample, but also in the lab, no? Because at the end you pay a higher amount of money to some proportion of the sample and a lower amount of money to others. So in the field question, which are fine, but you cannot estimate parameters of the utility function. So in this paper, we test if the use of hypothetical payoff has an impact on the measurement of risk preferences. We ran 3 experiments: a lab experiment in Spain, a field experiment in Kano, and a field experiment in Copán. We replicate the field experiment in Nigeria, in Honduras. So first, we validate in the lab a reduced version of the Hall and Lowry task with only 5 choices. The lab experimental design, in the lab we have 5 arms. We have 3 of them. We compare the short version of the Hall Lowry, paying subject real money, and then we have 1/5 of the sample paid. We paid with a probability of 1/10, and 1/5 of the sample also the subject made the short version of the Hall Lowry, and they don't receive a paid. And then we have these 2 arms where we use to validate the short version of the Hall Lowry. And in the field, it's very simple. We have 3 arms. The real treatment, 1/3 of the sample receive a probabilistic payment, and 1/3 of the payment receive a hypothetical task. So in the lab, the sample was a student. The questionnaire was in the field. We use enumerator. In and the sample was ordinary people. And for example, in Nigeria, we use tablets, and in Honduras was paper-based. So our outcome variables are three. We have consistency, whether the subject make consistency choices or not, risk aversion, which is the number of safe choices, and time, which is the number of seconds spent by the subject to complete the task. No? So, and then finally, we use the hypothetical measure as a baseline. So we compare if you pay in a whole Larry task, generate different measures. So we use we use a short version of the whole Larry task, which include these 5 decisions, and wherever it's between 2 lotteries, no, A and B. A and B offer a low and high payment with a probability, and these are the 5 decisions that we use in the short version. Let's go to see the results. Okay, in the lab, this is the cumulative distribution of the number of safe choices for the whole Larry task with 5 decisions, and you can see that the breeze, which is the probabilistic treatment, it's over the line for the hypothetical and real treatment. So if we run different regression for the outcomes, we can see that the breeze treatment reduce the number of safe choices, and the real payment doesn't have a significant impact over both measures. Remember that the baseline is the hypothetical group, no? So here the breeze generate more risk-loving attitudes than the hypothetical measure. So in the lab, we test if the reduced whole Larry version generate different risk measure. So here we have the coefficient of the same regression than before for consistency and risk aversion. And here we compare the hypothetical measure versus the real treatment using the whole Larry with 10 decisions. And you can see that we replicate the result than shown in the last table. And then here in column number 4, we see that we compare the whole Larry decision, the whole Larry task with 5 decisions, but maintaining constant the payment treatment. That means that if you use the whole Larry with 5 decisions in real payment, it doesn't change your measure of consistency and risk aversion. And this is the same for the results are maintained if you use the hypothetical treatment. So the results from Nigeria, let's see the regression result. We have the 3 outcomes here. We have consistency, risk aversion, and risk time. And you can see that there is no significant effect of the treatment payment. So the results suggest that in field in Nigeria, the breeze and real measure are equivalent to the hypothetical measure. In Honduras, we replicate the result. We can see that the treatment dummies for breeze, the probabilistic treatment or real, doesn't have a significant impact on the different outcomes. So to summarize the result, we found that we cover a lab and 2 field experiment with different subject pool and power, and we also find that the short version of the whole Larry with 5 decisions generate the same result as the long version, that is the whole Larry with 10 decisions. And in the lab and the field, hypothetical and real incentives measure produce the same risk preferences, which I guess that you can use hypothetical measures. You can use a hypothetical whole Larry. And when you compare the probabilistic treatment with the hypothetical payment, you have a different result. In the lab, we show that the probabilistic treatment have a significant impact and suggest that subjects display higher level of risk-loving attitudes. And in the field, we show that there is no difference between both measures. So here we show that you can use a short version of the whole Lowry, and that hypothetical measure from whole Lowry task are informative for, especially for the field, no? And also we show that apparently if you use the probabilistic treatment, the probabilistic mechanism for payment, this mechanism introduces some noise in the estimation of risk preferences. So thank you very much, and comments are welcome.
Thank you, Diego. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Benjamin. Okay. One chat. Okay. Okay, I can see that.
May I have
So,
one quick question, please, if possible?
one question. Okay.
May I have one quick question? Yes.
Yes.
Diego, I wonder, you have used these three criteria for comparison of preferences in the lab and in the field, right?
Yes.
But why only these three? Have you? I just a curiosity question, basically. I mean, I'm not questioning the conclusions, but why have you thought, or why haven't you tried, for instance, estimation of the parameters of utility functions of people who make decisions under different treatment conditions? I'm not saying it will necessarily increase anything, but why not? Just a question mark.
Okay, we use this outcome variable because you use the number of safe choices in order to estimate the parameters, no? But you are right, we are going to estimate the parameters of the utility function and compare if the risk parameter is different across these three treatments.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so your risk measures come from the utility function parameters, right? Not directly from choices, right?
No, we use only the number of safe choices. We have all the choices that made the subset, so we can estimate the different parameters.
Right. So these are parametric estimations of risk preferences, not choices, not directly from choices, right?
No, these are direct choices, no, because it's the number of safe choices. So we need to estimate. Sorry?
Okay, but why haven't you tried to estimate parameters of the utility functions?
Yeah, we are going to estimate, yes, because.
Okay, so we still a work in progress.
Yes,
okay,
we are.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And anybody else? Okay, thank you very much, Diego, for a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Now I'll go to my presentation. Just a minute. Okay. My name is Shosh Shahrabani. I will present, the topic is risk perception, emotions, risky decision-making during the COVID-19 crisis, a field study among healthcare workers. This is a joint project, still ongoing, with Shiran Board and Hannah Atmi from the Max Stern Israel Valley College from Israel. Let's begin with the background. The current study is a natural field study that was conducted during the first wave of the COVID-19 outbreak in Israel Actually, now we are in the second wave, unfortunately, of the outbreak of the COVID-19. The objective of the study was to examine the relationship between emotions, self-risk perceptions, and decision-making among healthcare workers under risky and uncertain circumstances. Actually, healthcare workers are on front line with this pandemic. Therefore, it is important that their decision-making, that we examine their decision-making, which is affect not only their health, but also their patients' health. In the past decade, several studies have dealt with the association between emotions and risk perception of individuals. Studies show that negative emotions such as fear and anger are associated with increased perception of risk, which in turn influences the decision-making process of individuals. We use the framework of the HBM, health belief model, which says that the motivation for health behavior is higher as the level of perceived susceptibility to catch the disease is higher, and as the level of perceived severity of the disease is higher. These two categories construct the perceived threat from the pandemic. Actually, the health belief model includes more categories than these two, but we wanted to focus on this perceived susceptibility and perceived severity, and to see the relation to risk perception and behavior under this condition. We had three objectives. The first one was to examine the health beliefs, risk perceptions, and the level of emotions among healthcare workers during the coronavirus period. The second objective was to analyze the frequency of compliance with the Ministry of Health guidelines at work and at home. Guidelines like wearing masks, keeping social distance, and keeping hygiene. The third objective was to examine the factors related to decision-making of healthcare workers regarding their prevention or precautionary actions taken at home during the corona period. At home and at work, sorry, both at home and at work. Our hypothesis leaned on previous studies. We expected to find that people with higher levels of negative emotions will be more pessimistic with respect to the risk of being infected by this virus. We also expected to find that professionals in health system will have higher levels of negative emotions, and this will in turn will be related to more precautionary actions during work and at home. We also expected to find that the perceived threat, which is the construct of the health belief model, will be associated with higher compliance with the guidelines of the Ministry of Health and other risky decision-making. The method was that the study was conducted via an online survey. The sample included 346 healthcare workers in Israeli healthcare system who treated patients during the coronavirus crisis. And actually, this is a unique study since the participants were all of them exposed to patients who were suspected of having this disease or actually diagnosed with the coronavirus disease. We see here the demographic characteristic of the of the participants. We will not go through it, but I will emphasize that 80%, about 80% of our participants worked at Israeli hospitals, and about 20% of our sample were working in a community services or geriatric facilities. The questionnaire included questions that were measured on a 7-point Likert scale, from 1, not at all, the agreement was not at all, or until 7, to a large extent. We have several sections in this questionnaire. The sections were perceived risks. We asked the participants to rank their agreement with questions like, with statements like, taking care of suspected patient with coronavirus without protection. This is an example for the perceived risks of working at hospitals or other healthcare facilities. The other section was emotions they felt during the last week. Negative emotions like how much you are afraid, nervous, frustrated, but also positive emotions like proud and strong. The third section was self-perception of risk of being infected by this virus. Other sections related to the HBM, the health belief model, measured the perceived threat from the COVID-19 pandemic. Participants had to rank their agreement with with statements like, the coronavirus is a very serious disease that can cause death. Finally, the last section dealt with the decision making regarding the work at healthcare facilities during the time of social distance instructions to the public. They had to rank their agreement with sentences like, I comply with the latest guidelines of the Ministry of Health, and I avoid close contact with patients. Let's turn to the results. First, most of our respondents reported that they always, 61%, or very often, 25%, comply with the hygiene guidelines at work. Yet they tended to comply with this guideline less stringently at home. About 38%, they say they always comply, while 32% very often. Also, we found that most respondents reported complying with the Ministry of Health behavior guidelines either always, 49%, or very often, 30%. Let's turn to the table 2. Table 2 shows the mean, standard deviation, and intercorrelations for the study variables. We see here first the levels that the participant ranked. The negative emotions, we see a relatively low rank. It's about 3 out of 7 on a scale of 7 points. Relatively a moderate rank of positive emotions, as you can see, almost 4, and relatively high perception of threat, perception of risk, and behavior. You can see the level that is relatively high. The intercorrelations, we had first the negative emotions, the level of negative emotions were significantly and positively correlated to the perception of threat and to the perception of risk, but the negative emotion were not correlated to the behavior. the positive emotion were negatively correlated to the perception of threat, but it was not correlated to the behavior. Perception of threat was correlated to a perception of risk and to the behavior, and the perception of risk was also significantly correlated to the behavior. The analytical model we used was SIM, meaning structure equation model. You can see here in this figure the results of the model. Let's first see the negative emotion. First, I can say that we control for age, ethnicity, and religion. We can see that the negative emotion of participants were correlated, significantly correlated to perception of threat and to perception of risks. But the negative emotion were not correlated to the behavior or the decision-making of healthcare workers. Let's turn to the positive emotions. Positive emotions were not related to any of these variable and were not correlated to the behavior. We also found strong connection between perception of threat and perception of risk. In addition, in this model, we found that the perception of risk was a mediator between the negative emotions and the behavior, meaning that higher level of negative emotions affect the higher level of perception of risks, and this in turn affects the behavior of the participants. Let's summarize our main results. Negative emotions were positively associated both with perceived threat and perceived risk, yet perceived risk was positively related to decision-making among healthcare workers. Perceived risk was found as a possible mediator between negative emotions and behavior. And also we found that higher negative emotions were related to higher perceived risk, which in turn was associated with higher compliance with guidelines. And let's turn to the conclusions. The coronavirus epidemic is a natural crisis situation that exposes healthcare professionals to real life-threatening situations where they are confronted with choices under risk and uncertain conditions. The results of this study highlight the complexity of decision-making among healthcare workers during the pandemic. The study points to the importance of negative emotions, perceived risk, and perceived threat as important factors that affect the decisions process of healthcare workers. Decision-making among those working in healthcare system has critical implications for public health and for workers among health as well. This result may help in designing intervention programs to improve decision-making in the healthcare systems. That's it. Thank you for listening. If anyone has questions. Okay. Thank you very much for listening to my presentations, and thank you for listening to this session, to participate in our session, and good luck to everyone.
I have a question, if I may ask a question.
Please.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I probably missed it. How did you select your sample, your subjects?
Actually,
how did you find them?
I know. We had a professional poll company which took this mission. They had, they contacted participants from hospitals and other healthcare facilities in Israel, in all the regions in Israel, north, center and south, and they brought us the sample. That's it.
Okay. But these medical workers, they had to agree to
Of course,
make this survey.
According to the ethical guidelines, of course.
Okay, so but it means that you can have a selection bias. So I mean, people who, let's say, more afraid about this situation, or I don't know, more nervous, they have a higher or a lower probability to take this survey, to agree to take the survey, and so you have a bias of all your results, right?
No, I don't think this.
It would be better.
I'm not sure, but I can tell you that it's a telephone survey. They don't know the questions in advance. First of all, the people who contact them tell them that this is a survey for research, and we will ask you about your work and everything else, but they don't know the specific questions. After their agreement to this study, they continue to ask them questions. So I'm not sure that someone who is not, is more afraid will answer the phone, or you can see that I'm not sure there is a selectivity bias on this point. Okay, thank you for your question anyhow.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much. We're a bit out of time. Thank you very much for attending the session, and see you all tomorrow. Central European time. Remember, Central European time for everything. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.